Thank you. So I lead the Reconciling Leaders Network, and we've just launched a course called Difference, which is helping Christians and church groups understand what it means to be a reconciler. It's a really introductory course called Difference, and that's come out of Archbishop Justin Welby's reconciliation ministry. Last week, I was sitting on my couch when my 7-year-old remarked at me, and she said, adults doing their favourite thing, sitting on the couch with a cup of coffee on their phone. Whilst her eyes rolled, I realised that soon we'll be swapping places, and it will be me on catch-up trying to understand her new online world. Because as we know, things move really quickly, and when I was young, a cloud referred to something fluffy in the sky. A tablet was medicine for when you were ill. A troll was a small toy. Post involved a walk and a red letterbox. An apple fruit to eat and a cookie, something my friend's mother's baked. But today, we have storage spaces in clouds. Fruit is global brands. Trolls are online bullies. You've probably all posted multiple times today from a standstill position. And this talk I wrote on a tablet. As many have said before, we are in the early days of the second machine age. Nearly 60 years ago, Marshall McLuhan was a media theorist. He termed the phrase global village and predicted the World Wide Web 30 years before it existed. He was a devout Christian, and when asked about church and media, he responded saying, "I would prefer that most questions of that sort be dealt by theologians, but they do not seem to be interested." He would be glad of us here today. The church working out how not to be disembodied, removed, broken of wholeness in a digital world, but instead living in a tech revolution and not discarnate, but here, following an incarnate Christ, embodying the values of Jesus and what he's taught us about being digital peacemakers. I want to look at two things today. One is 3 challenges that make it really hard for us thinking about digital reconciliation or peacemaking online. And secondly, 3 habits that we can all walk away with that we can hopefully implement in our everyday. But firstly, to paint a picture. Philosophy taught me, I think, therefore I am. Culture taught me, I shop, therefore I am. And a digital age or tech expert, Sherry Turkle, tells me, I share, therefore I am. We are more connected than ever, yet increasingly polarized. Sharing, yet lonely, informed, yet divided. Britain apparently getting angrier and meaner. The challenge is not hard to see, and we don't need to look for long to know that the world is not as it should be. Forces pushing us apart are stronger than those pulling us together. And we see fractures creaking, foundations cracking, and fear fueling. Red, blue, remain, leave, people and planet, male, female, nationalism and ethnicity, black, white, rich, poor, welcome or unwelcome. Diversity is God-given. But if we huddle with people like us, as we cluster closer, our divisions deeper. And it is in a fractured and broken world that God invites us to be reconcilers. Archbishop Justin's vision is for the church to be a beacon of peace, to be a reconciling presence in the midst of our communities. And in 2 Corinthians 5, verses 17 to 20, we learned that if we are in Christ, we are a new creation. The old is gone and the new has come. And that God is reconciling us to himself and the world to himself through Christ. And that he has given us this ministry of reconciliation. That we are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. And when I'm thinking about reconciliation, we're thinking about restoring the world to how God intended it to be. A restored relationship between me and God, between me and others, me and you, me and myself, and me and God's created earth. And it's an ancient call for a present day. In a conflicted and hurting world, many of us long for our faith to make a difference and to have a positive impact, but sometimes in the messiness, we don't know where to begin. So, firstly, what are the challenges? What is it that makes this invitation or this calling to be a digital peacemaker difficult? Firstly, we, you, me, maybe, we live in echo chambers. Social media enabling us to consume content that expresses our point of view. Ideologically, politically, theologically, we hear our own voice again and again. Brené Brown refers to something called ideological bunkers and what she calls the common enemy intimacy. The only thing we have in common is that we hate the same people. And slowly those people that we don't like, we push to the edges of moral inclusion, even sometimes starting to push them outside of humanity. And that can start with our language and how we talk about them. A BBC article describes Twitter as the industrialization of confirmation bias. Or as Barack Obama says, we now have a situation in which everyone's listening to people who already agree with them. Devices make it easy for us to reinforce our own realities to the neglect of a common reality that allows us to have a healthy debate and then try and find common ground and actually move solutions forward. In my boss's words, how can we learn to disagree well? There may not be a causal link between social media echo chambers and the political polarization that we see, but it makes me wonder how wide is our network and how social is our social media ring? Secondly, dividing walls. In a Facebook Live interview with Facebook, Archbishop Justin said, we're experiencing issues around how we find our identity, who we are. When something threatens our identity, we get very, very angry, understandably. And we start to build dividing walls between us and others. Media theorist Douglas Rushkoff says his desire to see a social network that instead of teaching us to see people as adversaries, it teaches us to see our adversaries as people. Because when we build a dividing wall, we create an othering, we create an us and them, we create a binary, and our language starts to push them aside and we dismiss them as the other, or diminishing the other to the offense that they caused, or to their differing point of view to ours, instead of recognizing them as a human with a story. Who do you need to see the face of God in? What walls might you need to take down? And what divides should you cross? Thirdly, missed horizons. We can get stuck in a fractured, conflicted, isolated place. Our perspectives can struggle. Our agency feels like it depletes, and we're left unsure of whether to be a passive viewer or an active participant. Psalm 121 says, I lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Sometimes we simply need to look up and ask for help. So, 3 habits that we could take away that start to think about how we could counter some of these challenges. 3 reconciling habits that are being curious, being present, and reimagining. So firstly, how we move from our echo chambers to generous curiosity. Be curious. The thing that can stop us is fear or echo chambers or feeling really comfortable having our realities reinforced. What helps us be generously curious is believing that all are made in the image of God, that all have innate value and all have a story to share. So what can we do? We can have proximity. The fact that it's really easy to live in an echo chamber because of our social networks, luckily it also means it's really easy to get out of those echo chambers because of our connection and because of how we can use social media. We can find different voices, opinions, and experiences, engage out of our comfort zone, listen to those who you disagree with, not in order to reload our argument, but in order to sit and listen and learn and understand. To have proximity with people that have a different ideology, a different political viewpoint, a different theology, a different geography. Allow a story to interrupt you, to challenge our assumptions, and to try to understand the world through other people's eyes. Secondly, be present. How we move from dividing walls to having holy encounters. And that is difficult because it requires humility. It means that people that we have othered, as well as being someone else's other, it means recognizing sometimes that we have prejudices we have inherited or ones that we create. And so crossing those divides takes honesty and vulnerability. And it can be awkward and uncomfortable. But what helps us, we heard it earlier, is in Matthew 25, we learn that our encounters with others are inseparable from our relationship with Christ. So let's get really good at doing different kinds of encounters. And what can we do? We can move from hostility to hospitality. Henry Nouwen says, hospitality is not to change people, but to offer them space where change can take place. It's not to bring men and women over to our side, but to offer freedom not disturbed by dividing lines. And as the church, sometimes we're really good at being host rather than being guest. And are we the same online? What does it look like for us to go and not be the one that's holding the power, but to go and be an unlikely person's guest? Being present demands energy, time, and nuance. And when we can customize our presence, it takes courage for us to go and be really present. And lastly, from missed horizons to daring to reimagine. What stops us? Reimagining, disbelief, a lack of hope, or potentially just being really, really busy. What helps us? Believing that God is making all things new, despite often, and I'm guessing you feel like me, which is that we don't come all sorted. We don't come as these brilliant peacemakers or reconcilers with our whole lives all intact. We come conflicted ourselves, but we come knowing that we have been forgiven and that we can offer forgiveness, that we come wounded and broken, but knowing that God calls us a new creation. And so we can come as ourselves, believing that God is with us. What can we do? We have an invitation to look beyond the current situation and to dream of the world that God is dreaming of. Walter Brueggemann, theologian, said, the task of the prophetic ministry is to nurture, nourish, and involve a consciousness and perception alternative to the consciousness and perception of the dominant culture around us. Is there something that God is stirring in you to dare to dream? That doesn't start with practicalities, but starts with hope, starts with what God might be planting inside you to dream for your church, for your context, for your networks, for your personal presence online. Rushkoff, the media theorist, said the digital renaissance arrived and it presented the unbridled potential of the collective human imagination. Some of it has gone a bit awry, paraphrased, but he says it's not a matter of rejecting the digital or rejecting the technological, it's a matter of retrieving the values that we are in danger of leaving behind and then embedding them in the digital infrastructure for the future. We come and we carry the values, the Christ-centered values of being curious and holding a high view of others, of being present, and of daring to reimagine. And by allowing God to fill us with his Holy Spirit and to stretch our imaginations, we can find hope and opportunity in the places we most long to see change. I'm going to close with a quote from Archbishop Justin. that I think really helps me when I'm thinking about the digital landscape offering us an opportunity to break down divisions with and beyond the church walls, to find new spiritual richness. And he says, when we can begin to handle diversity creatively and sincerely, honoring one another in our deep difference, we can begin to flourish together in previously unthinkable ways. Reconciliation is the transformation of alienation, not only restored, but reinvigorated. And so I add into you today, in a digital landscape that can be vitriolic and verbose, but also creative and connected. One of the greatest challenges of our time is will we have the courage to seek such a remaking of our world.